seriously popular.
I'm Caroline Cheetham.
And I'm Liz Hull.
In today's episode of The Trial of Lucy Letby, Baby K, we have the moment Baby K's mum told Lucy Letby how she destroyed her family's life when she tried to kill her daughter, and the moment Lucy Letby said, "I'm innocent," from the dock. We'll be back in just a moment.
Welcome to episode 8. She was defenceless.
Lucy Letby,
a nurse trusted with the lives of newborn babies.
Guilty of killing
Today
7 newborn children and attempting to murder 6 more.
A retrial on a charge the last jury couldn't reach a verdict on.
Lucy Letby is a child killer. Last year, she was convicted of murdering 7 babies and trying to murder 6 more when she was working as a neonatal nurse at the Countess of Chester Hospital in the northwest of England.
She was sentenced to spend her life in jail.
She's now back in court to face a retrial on one charge the jury could not reach a verdict on.
The alleged attempted murder of a premature baby girl known as Baby K.
In this podcast, we'll examine what's happened and bring you the details behind the headlines.
This is the trial of Lucy Letby, Baby K.
We're standing outside Manchester Crown Court as the sentence is handed down to Lucy Letby. We always knew this sentence was never going to make any difference, really, to the length of time that she will serve in prison. She's already serving 14 life terms. But for the parents of Baby K, this couple, who've bravely sat through 2 trials, years of heartbreak and more years of uncertainty, today signals maybe some level of justice for their daughter.
After a little over 3 hours of deliberation, the jury decided that their daughter was deliberately attacked by Lucy Letby. The jury in this trial didn't have to decide really on lots of medical evidence, as the jury in the first trial did, but they had to decide essentially if they believed Dr. Ravi Jairam, and they decided that they did. So we're here today as Mr Justice Goss hands down his sentence, but maybe more importantly, as the mum of Baby K finally has her say.
The impact is across all aspects of your life, like ripples in the water. Layer by layer of your life is touched. It's a raw emotion that just comes over you in an instant, unexpectedly and normally in the most trivial circumstances. Relationships were damaged, and for the most part we have managed to mend them to a point where everyone gets by, but it's there in the background and always will be.
Those were the words of Baby K's mum as she addressed the court and Lucy Letby for the first time. For over 10 minutes, she talked about the impact the death of her daughter has had on her family's life. Today, we'll bring you more of her statement, we'll bring you the judge's remarks, and we'll bring you the moment Lucy Letby said, "I'm innocent," as she was sentenced to a 15th whole life term in prison. So Liz, it was a pretty short hearing, less than an hour. In fact, and as we all queued up waiting to be let in at 10:30am this morning, we were really wondering if Lucy Letby was going to be there. And we were wondering that because, of course, last time when she was sentenced in August last year for her crimes, she refused to come up into court, so she never heard the words of their families. But this time, she was there.
Yeah, she was. And she was dressed in a black blazer and a blue shirt. She'd got her long hair was down again. And she sat quietly as Baby K's mum stood up and was invited into the witness box. That same witness box that Lucy Letby has given evidence from just a few days ago. And she came up and she read her statement. The court was packed with Baby K's family, police officers, and also the mum of Baby D was there to show her support as well. Several members of the jury were also present. They'd come back after delivering their verdicts on Tuesday, but the room was completely silent. You could hear a pin drop as Baby K's mum started reading her statement to the court. And we've had her words voiced up by an actor, and this is how she began.
People don't talk about child death, what that means, and how you handle it in everyday life, as it's not part of the natural cycle that we expect. The impact and reactions that we experienced from that day onwards have all been very different and continue to be a part of our lives that most people, including ourselves, struggle to understand, talk about, or show support of. We were, and sometimes still are, lost in this bubble of everyday actions and functions that now have no meaning or importance, but can cause overwhelming emotions from nowhere. It's a roller coaster. We could control our feelings before, held it together, but now any mention of baby K, and that lump appears uncontrollable in your throat. You're hot, uneasy, your senses on overload, listening but thinking and not fully processing all at once.
She explained that when her daughter died, it devastated her, but it never occurred to her that she could have been deliberately harmed at the hospital where she was born. But then the phone rang, and it was Cheshire Police with that terrible news that they were investigating her death.
A bolt out of the blue. She was defenceless. She was in the right place to be looked after. How was this possible? How could we have let this happen to her? Why has this happened? What happens next? All questions that were unable to be answered and might never be able to be.
She said so many of their relationships had been impacted. As a couple, their relationship was hit hard, she said, because they are now such different people and they can't escape the unfathomable thought that someone wanted their daughter to die.
Most of the time, we are unable to talk through what we were thinking or feeling in relation to what happened to baby K. Not only her death, but now that someone could have potentially knowingly hurt her, wanted her to die. We talk logistics and it stops there. We deal separately with the underlying feelings that we have and do this very quietly and on our own. This can echo through our circle of friends and the friendships that have changed forever through the stress and impact baby K's death has had, and now what is to follow with both trials. It really does show how people process differently in these circumstances. Some have been amazing and we couldn't have done it without them. Some have bowed out.
She said they now know that they are touchable, that the things they always thought could happen to someone else had happened to them, and that life can be turned on its head in a split second.
Our happy-go-lucky and positive view on life has been dampened, and all the good things are riddled with the apprehension, the waiting for it to go wrong, or an element of it not being quite right. The upheaval of baby K's death, the 6-year wait for first trial, 8-month trial, the verdict, and then learning we were doing it over again was heart-wrenching. But our baby girl needs a voice. We had to. We had no choice.
She even said being able to write this statement that she was delivering today took months of building up her courage. She said to open up the box of pain and anger, enough to function. But she said, for the sake of her daughter, she had to find that courage and not bury it away.
She is part of our family and deserves a place in our headspace and daily lives. How do we continue to have baby K in our lives positively as a big sister and not a tainted memory associated with this unthinkable nightmare? We will ensure that baby K is seen as their big sister, forever spoken about and never forgotten within our family.
Then she addressed Lucy Letby directly, and she couldn't look at baby K's mum. She kept her eyes averted.
The devastation expands so far and for so long when a child is lost, let alone under these circumstances. Will we get answers and the verdict that we want? Will that actually bring some peace and closure? Baby K is not here, never will be. We will never have what would give us peace, closure, or a feeling of being a complete family unit. However, you, Lucy Letby, will never hurt another child or have the privilege and joy that children give. Our time and effort that you have absorbed over the years will stop today, and our focus will remain on our beautiful children and building the most exciting and love-filled life that we possibly can.
We'll take a quick break there. So that was pretty much all the victim impact statement from baby K's mum. And as we said, it was delivered not just to Lucy Letby, but to a packed courtroom. And we also know this hearing was being streamed into other overspill rooms as well for other members of the press and the police to watch. And before we come to what the judge then had to say before he sentenced Lucy Letby to that 15th whole life term. We just wanted to say a little bit here about the number of people who've been at this retrial, certainly compared to the original trial. In the original trial, there were a handful of dedicated members of the public who watched the sort of 10-month hearing on and off. You know, there were retired nurses, teachers, a criminology student. And in fact, Liz, we interviewed some of them on our podcast at the time in episode 62. We called it the Court Watchers because they were interested in the process and they were interested in this case. But this time was different. There've been about 30 people here pretty much every day from day one. All of them trying to get a seat in the courtroom to see Lucy Letby in person and to watch the trial. Some of them have stayed throughout, some of them have been in and out. What's striking is that the majority of these people believe that Lucy Letby is innocent, even though none of them, Liz, sat through that first trial for any length of time, did they?
It's been fascinating for me. I think that I've never done a case where I've seen so many people turn up day after day, and certainly never seen that many people think that a defendant that sat in the dock that's been convicted of such, terrible crimes mustn't have done it. Some of them that have been there on and off have taken to wearing these yellow butterfly badges. Now, you might remember that on some of the pictures that have been in the press of Lucy Letby, that on her blue nurse's scrub, she had a name badge, and on that name badge was a yellow butterfly. And they've taken to wearing this butterfly as a show of support. Interestingly, I've been chatting to a few of them. We've both had a word with them, haven't we? And, what's quite astonishing is that some of them are retired or ex-NHS nurses. And one of them that I spoke to has, worked at the same hospital, the Countess, as Lucy Letby, even though she, didn't know Lucy Letby, but she'd worked there for 40 years before retiring. And, they don't look like conspiracy theorists, these people. They look like ordinary men and women.
Just to add to your point, just to be clear, none of them know Lucy Letby. She does have one woman, one lady who comes to court and has been at court with her every single day, and she does genuinely believe in her innocence, and we talk to her quite a lot. The others, it's an odd situation. I mean, today there was almost a sort of argument about who was getting into court. And one person was trying to sort of get ahead of another, and then a police officer had to arrive and try and calm it down. I mean, it's been strange, and we've often said in our episodes, this is a public building. You should come and be part of the process, watch these trials taking place, because it's our justice system, it's our democracy. But this has been on a bit of a different level because some of them, for example, have been doing YouTube videos outside the court. And in fact, I think it's fair to say today the judge alluded a little bit, didn't he, to members of the media who he said obey the rules, contempt of court, and know and understand how this works. And others,
well, we know a lot of them have been taking notes, haven't they, and have been reporting on it in inverted commas on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. And journalists are trained, they know the law, they know what they can report on, they know the strict laws of contempt and the reporting restrictions. And the judge has obviously alluded to this kind of citizen journalists, I suppose you could call them, who, maybe don't quite follow the rules. I mean, it was quite unprecedented the way the clerk at the beginning of each hearing read quite a strict warning to people every time a new hearing started each day about not recording anything that took place in the court, because obviously that's banned in England and Wales and nobody's allowed to record what happens. You can record what happens in a shorthand note, which is what obviously we do. Yeah,
or you can type it.
But
or you can scribble in your book, but you are not allowed to have a recording device. Phone. And there was certainly some sense at one point that someone was recording. Yeah. And you're right, I've never known that warning given every single time that we sit. And you're right, the clerk has said it every single time. So I think it has been interesting. And of course, people are absolutely entitled to think and believe whatever they want. And I suppose we'd only say that the vast majority of the people who've attended this trial and have been very clear on their thoughts about the fact that they think Lucy Letby didn't do anything wrong at any point, did not attend the first trial. 10 months of scientific, medical, rigorous evidence. And we'll come to this later, but one thing that I really wanted to say actually was a jury who were the most diligent, the most tireless. They gave a year of their lives up. And when they returned their verdicts eventually, and bear in mind, not all their verdicts were guilty. They considered each case individually. That was really clear from the length of time it took. They were devastated when they came back those days on the verdicts. The other thing we should mention, Liz, is this 13,000-word article that a lot of these people are alluding to. Now, this is the New Yorker magazine, and this was published, wasn't it, just before this trial? So it meant it was illegal to have it in this country.
Yeah, so it has been reported to the Attorney General, this article, because there were strict reporting restrictions in place, banning the media from debating the case, I suppose, in print or on a broadcast before the retrial began. But it's fair to say that Lucy Letby's supporters have kind of seized on this article because they see it as, you know, the first mainstream publication, I suppose, to hint that their theories that she didn't do this. Now, I've read the article, and it's fair to say it's a good read. It's a long read, but it's a good read. But there's, you know, all sorts of claims that the science relating to the insulin testing and air embolism was flawed, and that, you know, the babies didn't really die the way the prosecution said they died, and they died because they become infected by some sort of undetectable bug or bacteria that had got into the unit because the drains were blocked and there was sewage.
Yeah, that came up in the original trial, of course, and it was the only witness apart from Lucy Letby that Ben Myers called. It was a plumber who did say that I think there was at one point a problem with a sink, and that plumber was called, and it was part of the case that was there an infection on the wood. The jury didn't buy it. They didn't believe it. They didn't think that was credible, and the prosecution described it as a red herring, and that was what the jury decided. So it's not that that wasn't ever alluded to at the time or discussed or considered. It was, and it was decided that wasn't credible.
Well, there was no evidence put forward that any of the babies had any kind of infection or bacterial infection linked to any kind of sewage, so it just didn't bear out.
And I think we'd say, from reading the article, based on, you know, our 64 episodes of the original trial, sitting through every single day, that the author cherry-picked bits of the evidence. I think that was really clear.
It's interesting. It raises a debate, but there's like large chunks of the prosecution case that were conveniently, left out. There's no mention of the 250 plus confidential handover notes that were found under Lucy Letby's bed that she kept as trophies. There was no talk about the suspicious Facebook searches that she made for the parents, you know, like baby Kay's parents, who she looked for 2 years later, or the mum of babies E and F, who she looked up on Christmas Day. There was no mention of Lucy Letby's odd behaviour in front of the parents when a baby died, or the pictures of the cards that she'd sent or received from them after she'd murdered them, you know, that were found on her mobile phone. You might remember, Caroline, this obsession she had with the married doctor. There was no mention of that. Or how she was accused of deliberately altering nursing notes to make it seem like a baby was on the verge of collapse. You know, none of that was covered in the New Yorker piece. So, you know, while it does raise an interesting debate, you know, it's definitely not a fair reflection of what happened in the courtroom over those 10 months, I would say.
No, and also it was raised at the beginning of this trial that because of the publication of that article, which, while it was published in the US, and then it was geo-blocked, so people in this country couldn't get it. Actually, it was on sale in WH Smith's, and both you and I could get it pretty easily.
Yeah.
So, and it actually raised the debate at the beginning of this trial, could Lucy Letby get a fair trial because of that article? So the very article that seemed to cast doubt on those convictions was then causing a problem at the beginning of this trial, that she couldn't actually get a fair trial. So it was one of the many reasons that Ben Myers put forward that she possibly couldn't get a fair trial. One of the things I think we wanted to mention as well today is, you know, we get a lot of questions, some polite, some not, about us being gullible, believing what we're told, swallowing what we're being told in court. And I think it's just, we're journalists, and actually a court case is not for us to have a view on, actually. It's a fact that she has been found guilty by a jury of 12 people, ordinary people who decided that she killed or harmed these babies. That is what we report because it's a fact. It's not up for debate. We're not detectives and we're not Miss Marple, and it's not for us to pick holes in that. People choose to do that. That's completely fine. We're journalists reporting a court case. And so legally, we're not allowed to go any further than what we're being told in court. And certainly, from our perspective, we've certainly covered both sides of this story. As much as we could, almost every word of Lucy Letby's defence.
There's no doubt that we covered the prosecution and the defence in every single episode that we did. In fact, if we hadn't, our lawyers would have been, seriously concerned, and we wouldn't have been able to produce the episodes like we did. So I don't buy the criticism that we are skewed towards the prosecution case. I feel like we reported fairly, and like you said, Caroline, it's the fact that she was convicted. If she'd been granted leave to appeal, we would have reported faithfully on those grounds to appeal, which we're going to tell you about a bit later on. But the appeal's been rejected, so that's where we are for now.
Yeah, and I suppose if you don't believe in our court process, the appeals process, the trial process, the jury process, that's completely fine. But that's the system that we live by in this country. And as court reporters covering trials, it's called open justice. And many, many, many people believe that not enough coverage of court cases is happening. And that's one of the things we're trying to address with the podcast. But I think you're right to point out that we have covered pretty much every word of Lucy Letby's defence in this trial. We voiced up pretty much every single sentence that she said when she was in the witness box. The fact was that she didn't say very much, but we voiced up and had our actors voice up every single cross-examination, really, from Ben Myers.
And in a way, having all these people come to court is good because
they can see it.
They can see it and hear it for themselves.
One of the things we did want to address, we've talked about sort of people online or people who doubt the veracity of these convictions, picking over certain details. And one of the things we did chat about that we did think we should clear up, because we haven't talked about it in the podcast, primarily because it's what's been called an agreed fact. Therefore, it's not up for debate. And this is the error, if you like, in the swipe data. This is the data of nurses and doctors and people coming in and out of the unit. And the fact that what was thought to be the timings of people coming in and out was actually wrong. And that was found out in this trial and cleared up.
So essentially what happened was, in the original trial, there was a mistake made by the police in that the swipe data timings were presented as people leaving the neonatal unit, when in fact what the data recorded was the doctors and nurses coming back into the unit, which
makes sense.
If you think about it logically, because anyone can let themselves out of a neonatal unit once they're in there, usually by pressing one of those big green buttons that you see on secure doors in hospitals. But what they can't do is get in without a pass, for obvious security reasons. So this mistake was acknowledged at the beginning of the retrial. Both the prosecution and the defence accepted that it was a genuine mistake. But that's just one kind of small detail that's been kind of raked over online as some kind of evidence that Dr. Jairam was lying about his testimony, or
a broader conspiracy, really, I suppose.
Yeah, that all the convictions now must be unsafe because these timings were wrong. But the fact is that both sides accepted the mistake had been made. And actually, Ben Myers, Lucy Letby's barrister, didn't really make anything of it.
No, because it changed nothing. It changed nothing. So that was... we hadn't mentioned it because the agreed facts, there are hundreds and hundreds of agreed facts in a court case, and we don't rake over all of them. This was an agreed fact at the beginning of this trial, and very little was made of it. Very happy to talk about it if people are asking questions, because that was sort of the substance of it. And I think the other thing, before we talk about the appeal that Lucy Letby launched at the Court of Appeal that we've not been able to discuss until now, is... I think we both wanted to mention that, again, and this episode hopefully shines a light again on this, that for all the conspiracies out there and for all the people, tweeting about it and not believing what this jury and the other jury have found, there are parents at the centre of these cases. parents like baby Kay's mum, who we've just brought you the words of. They've lost babies, they've had babies attacked, they've had babies seriously injured, and we mean lifelong injuries in some cases. So can you just imagine how upsetting this all is for them, this debate? And of course we know it is, because we heard about it at the beginning of the public inquiry.
So we've had one hearing of the public inquiry already. It's due to start in September properly, but we know that the barristers representing the families, you know, mentioned at this hearing, they are incredibly upset by it, because we've had one hearing of the public inquiry already. It's due to start properly in September, and the barristers representing some of the families involved in the case stood up at that hearing and explained how upsetting they'd found these conspiracy theories and, you know, the proliferation of them online linked to the case, which is unprecedented, really.
Yeah, and to go back to the point we made before, 2 juries, no axe to grind, carrying out their duty with no agenda from day one, and there's never been a hint that they did anything other than what was asked of them. And as you said, I think when this jury came back in and when the other jury came back in for the previous case, many of those jurors were upset, and that's why some of them came back today.
Because they take it so seriously. It's
Because
obviously
it's
a serious job.
And we've said that throughout our trials, actually, of every trial we've done on this podcast, that the juries that are empanelled to sit on these cases do an amazing job. But let's just talk about the appeal a little bit, because we weren't able to talk about the Court of Appeal hearings. This 3-day hearing at the Court of Appeal that Lucy Letby launched that took place before this retrial, because this retrial was taking place, and again reporting restrictions were put in place, but that was lifted at this conviction. So which means we can now tell you a little bit about the appeal and what Lucy Letby and her barristers were claiming and what the grounds of appeal were. So yeah, in a nutshell, there were 4 grounds for appeal, which is what they put forward to the Court of Appeal, which led to this 3-day hearing. So we'll just walk you through each of those, really. And the first one, I'll let you explain, Liz, involved the main expert witness, Dr. Dowie Evans.
So Mr Myers essentially rehashed the same argument before the 3 appeal court judges. Now, these are some of the most senior judges in the country: Dame Victoria Sharp, Mr Justice Holroyd and Mrs Justice Lambert. And essentially what Mr Myers was saying was Mr Justice Goss got it wrong, and that he should never have allowed Dr Evans to continue to give evidence in the original trial.
Yeah, so the second reason he gave to the Court of Appeal involved the medical evidence. And as we just said, there was months and months and months of quite complicated medical evidence. Now, this was around the air embolus, or the injection of air into the bloodstream that we heard so much about in the previous trial. And just to remind you, that was said to be what Lucy Letby did to 7 of her victims, babies A, B, D, M, E, I and O. Now, Mr Myers told the Court of Appeal that the science or the research behind air embolus was very weak and insufficient and couldn't be relied upon. And he called an expert witness, didn't he, to the hearing, Dr Shu Lee, who's a Canadian academic. And he wrote the paper, actually, that led to all of this.
This was quite interesting because, you know, those of you that followed our podcast carefully might remember there was reference in the trial to a medical paper that had been written in 1989 called the Lee and Tanswell paper, which focused on air embolus. And Mr Myers called the author, one of the authors of that report, Dr Shu Lee. Now, it was this paper that you might remember that Dr J-Ram said he read following the death of the 2 triplets in June 2016. And he said when he read it, it sent a physical chill down his spine, because then that was the moment that he realised that the rashes he'd seen on babies A and M when they collapsed were being described in this medical paper.
Yeah, so while the report of Dr Lee was referenced in the original trial, he wasn't called, but he was then called to the Court of Appeal hearing, and he appeared on video link. And his point was that only one specific type of skin discoloration or rash was indicative or diagnostic of air embolism. And the point that Mr Myers was making was that Dr Evans and Sandy Bowen, who was the other prosecution witness, had strayed away from this specific discoloration and were sort of lumping other types of rashes and discoloration in with the diagnosis. And that was obviously the argument made to the Court of Appeal by Mr Myers.
But Mr Johnson obviously contested this and said that, Dr Lee hadn't been given any of the baby's medical records. He hadn't read any of the witness statements from the doctors and nurses that had seen these rashes, so he wasn't in a position to comment on it.
So that was the second reason Mr Myers gave to the Court of Appeal around the rash. The third argument was around the judge, Mr Justice Goss, and his directions to the jury before they began their deliberations. And he said to them that they did not have to be sure of what had happened to each individual baby, just that they had been caused harm before they collapsed. In fact, he told them not to play detective, that they didn't need to pinpoint exactly or precisely how the babies were harmed, just that harmful acts had taken place. And Mr Myers said that was also not correct.
Yeah, but again, the prosecution disagreed. Mr Johnson said, the law didn't require the prosecution to show what precise acts are done to cause harm or death. He said cases are built on direct evidence, so from witnesses and what they say, but also via circumstantial evidence. And he went on to list some of the circumstantial evidence that had pointed to Lucy Letby's guilt, such as the I am evil note, handover sheets again, the condolence cards, the odd behaviour, which he cited was all circumstantial, but all pointed to her guilt.
So finally, the fourth ground that Mr Myers highlighted for the Court of Appeal was that Mr Justice Goss, the judge, had failed to properly investigate, he said, a complaint against a juror when they were deliberating their verdicts last August. Now, this is a bit complicated, but basically, we couldn't, again, report it at the time, but basically, this complaint centred on how one of the jurors had visited a cafe and was apparently said to have said to somebody that the jury had made their minds up from the start about Lucy Letby's guilt. Now, actually, if that had been true, that could have derailed the trial, because that's a really serious allegation.
Yeah, it would have been a disaster. But what the Court of Appeal actually heard was that this complaint, which was made around August the 2nd, so about a month into the jury's deliberations, had been investigated by Mr Justice Goss, and the complaint was found to have been made maliciously. So what had happened was the owner of this cafe had got a grudge against this juror's partner, who used to work at the cafe, because they'd fallen out over the sale of a mobile phone. And on the same day that the complaint was phoned into Manchester Crown Court, the juror's partner had gone to the cafe to retrieve her phone and was assaulted. And the police were called. The issue was dealt with by community resolution. But Mr Johnson said it was no coincidence that within an hour or two of the police leaving the cafe, this complaint was phoned into the court.
Yeah, and actually it turned out that Mr Justice Goss had interviewed this particular juror just to find out for himself exactly what had happened. And he was satisfied that nothing untoward had happened in terms of the jury deliberations, and that the incident in the cafe had led to what he decided was a malicious allegation being phoned through. So those are the main four reasons put forward by Mr Myers on behalf of Lucy Letby to get her convictions overturned, and as they were dismissed.
Yeah, so what happened this week, after the verdict came through of the retrial, the judgment was published from the Court of Appeal, and those judges said actually Mr Justice Goss's handling of the trial had been thoughtful, fair, comprehensive and correct. And they ruled that none of the four legal reasons advanced by Mr Myers were arguable, and that the criteria for the admission of Dr Lee's evidence hadn't been met. So essentially her chance to appeal has been dismissed.
Yeah, so that basically means that today's sentencing hearing is essentially the end of the road, the legal road anyway, for Lucy Letby. For now, that's it. She won't be back in any courtroom anytime soon unless she's charged with further offences. And we know that is a possibility because Operation Hummingbird, that's the investigation into Lucy Letby's career as a nurse and a trainee nurse, has brought her into contact with an estimated 4,000 babies. That's at the Countess and also at Liverpool Women's Hospital, and that investigation is ongoing. So for now, there's no more legal roads imminent for Lucy Letby, but of course, if there are, we'll be across them. So we'll end today's episode with the judge's final comments and get to his sentence, which was another whole life term. Now, that makes 15 whole life terms, which we believe, Liz, is the longest sentence ever to be handed down.
Yeah, it's a record, I think, as no one else serving 15 whole life tariffs, as they're called. You know, Lucy Letby will die in jail. She'll never be freed. Like in the last trial, his comments were recorded, and these are his words.
You are intelligent, and outwardly, you were a very conscientious, hard-working, confident, and professional nurse, which enabled you repeatedly to harm babies on the unit without arousing suspicion for some time. You relished being in the intensive care nursery, and your messages to colleagues revealed an interest in babies that were on or coming to the unit who had uncommon medical conditions. You would often conduct searches on Facebook for parents of babies you had murdered or attempted to murder. I repeat what I have said before. Only you know the reason or reasons for your murderous campaign. You caused her physical suffering and added psychological suffering to her family. During the course of this trial, as you did in the last trial, you have coldly denied any responsibility for any wrongdoing and sought to attribute fault to others. You have no remorse. There are no mitigating factors. In their totality, the offences of murder and attempted murder were of exceptionally high seriousness, and just punishment, according to law, requires a whole life order. Lucy Letby, you will spend the rest of your life in prison.
So Mr Justice Goss then told the guards to take her down, and as she stood, she held out her arms and calmly, but I think desperately actually, said, "I am innocent." She was then taken out of the dock by 3 female prison officers, and this was quite a shocking end to the court today, actually.
Yeah, it was really quite dramatic. You know, it wasn't, she didn't shout it or cry it,
No,
did
I don't think she did. It was
But
audible, but it wasn't a...
It was almost resigned, you know, I'm innocent. And, you know, there was gasps from people in the public gallery as she said this, but then she disappeared and was taken down to the cells pretty quickly.
As we said, so that's the final trial Lucy Letby is facing in relation to the offences at the Countess of Chester Hospital for now, which means that's it for this season of the podcast. As promised, you can now listen back to all of the episodes from our original trial podcast, which are now back online. They were genuinely taken down for legal reasons, as we said, to not in any way interfere with this trial, and they're now back up as we promised. We will, as ever, be following and covering more trials, and of course Jack and Katie will be covering the sentencing of Gavin Plum for his plot to kidnap, rape and murder Holly Willoughby next week.
Yes, you can still read my reports on today's sentencing hearing in the Mail, and you can follow us on X at The Trial Podcast and contact us on thetrial@mailmetromedia.co.uk.
Yeah, we do love hearing from you, so you can also send us a comment on Spotify or send us a voice note on WhatsApp on 07796 657 512. Start your message with the word trial.
See you then.